It has been 1 month since the deadly October 7th assault by Hamas on Israeli territory, which turned into a full-blown war. Israel's call to lay siege on Gaza found unwavering support in Western allies, led by the US and the UK. But as the relentless attack on the Gaza Strip rages on, the alarming death toll of civilians, the rampant destruction of the region, and the looming clouds of war committed by Israeli forces has raised a myriad of questions for its allies. Weeks after offering unconditional support to Israel's military action, US President Joe Biden said that progress has been made on the prospects of a humanitarian pause in Gaza.
Mr. President, any progress on the humanitarian pause?
Yes.
The development comes on the heels of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refusing to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza as a dire humanitarian crisis unfolds in the war-torn region.
אזרחי ישראל, מאז פרוץ המלחמה הנוראה באותה שבת שחורה, אנחנו איבדנו מאות אזרחים ואזרחיות, לוחמים ולוחמות, חיילים וחיילות, אנשי ונשות כוחות הביטחון, המשטרה וההצלה. איבדנו לוחמים נפלאים, ישראלים נהדרים, מלח הארץ, אנשים שפשוט בלמו בגופם, לפעמים בציפורניים.
As world leaders scramble to find a diplomatic solution to the volatile situation in Gaza, citizens in Western nations have taken to the streets, pressuring their leaders to call for an immediate ceasefire. Thousands have gathered in London and outside the White House in Washington, D.C. to demand accountability for a genocide-like situation in Gaza. Paris also witnessed its authorized first pro-Palestinian protests since the war began. The social outrage comes as a reaction to Israeli forces continuously bombarding hospitals and ambulances in Gaza. Just last week, a fresh wave of public condemnation poured in after Israeli forces targeted and struck the Jabalia refugee camp that houses over 116,000 registered Palestinian families that had been displaced. The public outcry over Gaza's humanitarian crises and Israel's refusal to neither allow regular supplies nor commit to a ceasefire has begged the question: have the US, UK and other Western allies of Israel chosen to be on the wrong side of this war? And more importantly, after weeks of financial and military aid to Israeli defense forces, how will leaders of the West navigate diplomatic waters to convince Israel to agree to a humanitarian pause in Gaza?
I'll let others make judgments, but I'll set out what has happened since the current cycle of conflict on October 7th, when Hamas went in with ground attacks and killed more than 1,000 Israeli civilians and foreign nationals. Not just the US and the UK, but much of the international community, often behind closed doors, said two things to the Israeli leadership. The first is, look, we agree with you that Hamas must be isolated and indeed pushed out of authority in Gaza. Indeed, Iran, the backer of Hamas, must be isolated. But from the very start, they added the second point to the Israelis, more of a question, which is, how are you going to do this? And what, again, the US, the UK, other European countries, Asian countries have said is an all-out military assault to, quote, destroy Hamas. In the words of Prime Minister Netanyahu, we don't think that will work. Not only do we think it's a military risky option, we think that instead of separating civilians from Hamas, you'll wind up driving civilians into the arms of Hamas as their only protector. And they've maintained that message for weeks, even as Israel has moved closer and closer and then launched the ground offensive a week ago. The fact of the matter is that if, at the end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu and his fellow members of the war cabinet were dedicated to, quote, destroying Hamas, that meant they were going to unleash this bombing that would also kill many thousands of civilians. It meant that they would launch a ground offensive that could kill many thousands more. In other words, there's almost nothing the international community, including the United Nations, could do to stop Israel from carrying out those attacks. That's where we are right now. You know, with regret, I have to say, while understanding the need for Israel to defend itself, which is what, again, the international community said, we understand you have to defend yourself. For Israel to go on the offensive this way constitutes, and let's call it what it is, crimes against humanity. but crimes against humanity, which Benjamin Netanyahu thinks are entirely justified if it, one, saves his political future, and two, knocks out some and possibly most of Hamas's leaders.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.